Let's do this one last time. My name is Takia Yamashiro. An alien from the planet Spider injected his blood into my veins, and for the past 45 years, I've been Japan's one and only Spiderman. I think you know the rest. I saved Japan, piloted a giant robot, faced off against the worst band ever. I saved a lot of kids in danger. But there were others I couldn't save, including my father and Garia. But they will be avenged. The Iron Cross army will fall. Because I'm Spider-Man.
Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. There are a lot of different versions of Spider-Man out there, to the point that they're starting to run into each other in both animation and live action. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the most different Spider-Men of them all.
Adios, Mafia.
Okay, maybe not that different. At least this Spider-Man is still a hero. But then again, Turkish Spider-Man is the one who had clones.
Long before Marvel started dominating movie theaters, they tried making a variety of TV shows based on their characters. Sadly, many of them ended up just being pilot movies, with characters like Thor, Captain America, and Doctor Strange not getting a full series. While the most successful of these shows, getting multiple TV movies after a successful series run, was The Incredible Hulk. How times have changed. Spider-Man was put in the unique position of being made in both the United States and Japan. In the latter case, it was made in partnership with Toei Studios, the people that brought us Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. You might expect Spider-Man to have nothing to do with either shows, but as it turns out, both had been cancelled in 1975 and 77 respectively. When both shows came back, they were heavily influenced by Toei's Spider-Man show, especially Super Sentai.
Of course, one other thing to keep in mind is another thing that was growing in popularity in Japan at the time: giant robots.
Though unlike your average spider slayer, this giant robot would be piloted by Spider-Man himself, intended to battle the monsters of the week seen in the show, which were capable of growing to giant size. This broke new ground for the tokusatsu genre and ensured this series would be very unlike what you'd read in the comics. Just about everything familiar about Spider-Man is reimagined for this show. His allies, his enemies, even his identity is changed to something else.
But unlike most times when a show is nothing like the source material, being different is what makes this series so much fun, and why it's remembered by so many as the crazy Spider-Man show that inspired Power Rangers. Let us begin.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference.
Alright, let's get this out of the way. There is no Stan Lee cameo in this series. Yeah, I was pretty disappointed when I found out too. Unfortunately, he won't be cameoing in anything until the trial of the Incredible Hulk. There isn't even an appearance by Bruce Campbell.
Oh, that sucks.
Whatever, theme song. I'd say it's catchy. In the same way the theme from the 1967 cartoon is catchy. Cheesy and a bit dated, but still enjoyable. When it's used during fight scenes, it enhances the action. I might actually like it best this way. Something worth commenting on is that the theme is indicative of how Japan sells heroes and heroism to the audience compared to the United States. While both songs have upbeat tunes, the lyrics are a very different story. The cartoon focuses on how cool Spider-Man is to see in action.
Does whatever a spider can, spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
And then you have Toei Spider-Man, lamenting the heavy burden that Spider-Man bears.
Technically, this version of Spider-Man has an in-universe theme song in addition to the one you just heard. Sort of. We only hear it in one episode, so let's call it an honorable mention. The Spider-Man Boogie. Now that is a groovy 70s tune if ever I heard one. Unfortunately, Spider-Man himself doesn't seem to like it all that much.
Time to get started with the first episode. It establishes a lot in a short amount of time. The Spider-Man of this universe is a motocross racer, Takia Yamashiro. There's your Kamen Rider influence on the show, who has a photographer girlfriend named Hitomi and lives with his siblings Shinko and Takagi. Takia has a father, that is until his canon event, when his father is murdered by the show's villains, an invading alien force known as the Iron Cross Army.
And, if you thought Tobey Maguire had some funny facial expressions in the Sam Raimi film trilogy, get a load of this.
I think it goes without saying this was Shinji Toto's first leading role, so that certainly explains his performance as Takia. I recently saw the first episode of Marvel 616, which focuses on the making of Toei's Spider-Man. It features interviews with Toto, among others, talking about their time on the show, and it was here I learned his own father had died shortly after he landed the role, and it was those feelings he tapped into when he was acting in this scene. He's giving it his all, as funny as it may look on screen. Especially seeing as other scenes, he's been showing off some pretty silly reactions to the telepathic messages he's been hearing all throughout the episode, calling for revenge. This turns out to be the voice of Garia, an alien from the planet Spider, having been trapped in a cave on Earth for 400 years. And in that time, the Iron Cross Army has been interfering in human history in preparation for their conquest of Earth. So he gives Takia a bracelet that injects him with the Venom symbiote? Actually, it injects him with Garia's blood, giving Takia spider powers as well as his costume. Looks good for a TV budget. He doesn't use his webs to swing across rooftops, largely due to Toei being unable to afford to film scenes in downtown Tokyo, swinging from trees, cranes, and bridges and such whenever possible because that's a lot easier. Well, it's less expensive anyway. That isn't to say the suit actor isn't putting his life on the line during these stunts. He certainly is. Stunt coordinator Osamu Kaneda went through great pains to make sure Spider-Man actually swings his webs and moves around like he does in the comics, which also resulted in Spider-Man's funny-looking Naruto running. His webbing is used a lot more like a rope, because it is a rope, as well as a big net to catch multiple bad guys, while his spider sense is very convenient. Instead of warning him of imminent danger, it alerts Takia of the episode plot. I'm not even kidding. 1 minute he'll be sitting in his room, and the next he's all, "My spider sense is tingling!" And then he's off driving away in the spider machine. Oh yeah, did I mention that? Spider-Man has a flying car, the Spider Machine GP7. So why didn't Tony Stark give Peter Parker one of these? He had no qualms with giving a teenager access to a strike drone, but not a flying car. What were that man's priorities? One of the most impressive feats pulled off by this show is the wall crawling. This involved suit actor Hirofumi Koga actually crawling up the sides of buildings, without a safety harness. That takes dedication and skill. The bit where he climbs Tokyo Tower in the opening theme? Apparently he really did climb about 40 meters up. I have no words. Some of the footage of Spider-Man climbing walls is repeated throughout the show, most likely to save costs. Not unlike the 90s animated series reusing footage, really. In fact, the scene of Takia getting his powers from Garia is reused in so many episodes, it almost makes watching the first episode unnecessary. You could pick and choose any episode of the series to watch, and there's a good chance the origin will be shown, so you'll be up to speed in no time at all.
Speaking of reusing footage, you're probably waiting to hear me talk about Spider-Man's giant robots. And what a story it is.
Takia confronts the Iron Cross Army for the first time after this origin, fighting their duck-faced foot soldiers and their monster of the week, which grows to giant size immediately. Get used to that. To fight it, Spider-Man calls upon Marveler, Garia's spaceship that transforms into a giant robot, known as Leopardon. I like the design, though the webbing decal is the only thing about it that really screams Spider-Man. The fight scenes involving Leopardon and the monsters are the first time Toei did anything like this.
Ultraman came out over a decade earlier, and that show was lucky because it was made by Eiji Tsuburaya, a pioneer of the genre with years of experience making giant monster movies. Tsuburaya Productions having a larger budget may have also helped. So by comparison, Toei's efforts with the Leopardon fights are clunky. For one thing, the suit actor was clearly having a hard time moving around in that thing, but it also happened to be made to a different scale to the monster costumes, and as a result, Leopardon is slightly taller than its opponents. The show tries to edit around this by not having them appear together in the same shot whenever possible. Lots of ranged attacks are involved, including the finishing move. Not a diagonal cut with its sword like many mechs of future Sentai shows, but instead the sword vigor attack involves throwing it. Not exactly the ideal situation for Toei, and things only got worse somewhere around the halfway point of the series, when the Leopardon suit was stolen from the set. Who could have done such a thing?
A thief! A criminal! He stole my suit! He's a menace to the entire city!
This leads Leopardon to being depicted through stock footage, interspersed with new footage of the monsters attacking and recoiling from attacks. Very little of the footage shows Leopardon taking damage, leading to some half-jokingly saying it's the most powerful robot from any show Toei produced. But I came to a very different conclusion, that when the monsters grow, they become weak and ineffectual, seeing as they were a challenge to Spider-Man on the ground, but Leopardon simply walks through their attacks because that's all Toei got the chance to film before they lost the suit. Shot reverse shot is the primary way these sequences are edited, and these fights get shorter as the series goes on, with Leopardon transforming and then immediately using its finishing attack. Sometimes Marveler doesn't transform into Leopardon. Instead, it destroys the monster with a barrage of weapons fire. It's weird to think that after a while, even this becomes stock footage. Did they lose the Marveler model as well? Actually, I take that back. I don't think there was a studio model. Instead, Toei appears to have used the toy itself to depict its transformation. Although if this reminds me of anything, it's once again Season 2 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, a show that needed to splice together footage from two separate shows in order to create its own giant monster and robot battles. Shot reverse shot in 1970s Japan, shot reverse shot in 1990s America.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Let's talk about the protagonist and his allies. Takia is a more complicated character than he appears at first glance. In order to keep his identity secret, Takia acts like a buffoon, resulting in some genuinely funny pratfalls. It works at tricking the bad guys, but it has the unfortunate side effect of making him look like an unreliable fool to his siblings. Like Peter Parker, his time as Spider-Man leads him to neglecting his job, and as a consequence, he and his family are frequently strapped for money. Unknown to his siblings, Takia took the death of their father the hardest. This leads to a Spider-Man that doesn't do much in the way of making wisecracks at the bad guys like you might expect. There is this one moment. But for the most part, Takia is out for blood when he's facing off against the Iron Cross army. Case in point, his most famous catchphrase of the show. Well, I say it's his most famous catchphrase, but he does tend to vary it up a bit. Okay, he varies it up a lot. Which goes hand in hand with his motivation being revenge on the Iron Cross army. In the West, when Spider-Man stories play around with Peter Parker wanting revenge, it's always portrayed negatively. Yet Takia has both his father and Garia encouraging it with their dying words. That isn't to say there aren't some silly moments with Spider-Man. You've probably seen this scene of him firing a machine gun floating around the internet. Or this bit. He pushes himself hard to help children menaced by the Iron Cross army. So much of his time spent around Children of the Week that it leaves him with very little time to spend with his actual siblings. They become less relevant as the show progresses, mostly to serving as exposition on an Iron Cross army plot that Takia can overhear. But they ground Takia's character, especially early on. His bumbling doesn't seem to bother Hitomi as much, as she's always eager to drag him along to see the latest incidents caused by the Iron Cross Army. And on the plus side, she doesn't get kidnapped by the villains all the time. Once or twice, yes, but it's not as often as you might expect. Hitomi's a solid character. She kind of reminds me of the PS4 version of Mary Jane. She's also a massive improvement over all of the women we saw in the original Kamen Rider. This isn't even a contest. It makes me wish Takia did tell Hitomi about being Spider-Man. I think it could have worked out for them. At the very least, they could do what Peter Parker did and help Hitomi's career by getting pictures of Spider-Man. This show needed to trust itself more. If it shook up the status quo more often, I think a lot of things could have gone from good to great. A handful of guest stars make a second appearance, but after that they don't stay recurring characters, despite having at least some potential to be more than what they are. Of course, this is an episodic series, so that could be why there are so few changes to the status quo. A great example of this is the character Juzo Mamiya. He's introduced in the Spider-Man film tying into the series as an Interpol agent who makes contact with Spider-Man in order to join forces. While Takia continues to get word on the Iron Cross Army activity from Interpol throughout the main series, Mamiya himself is only in 3 episodes. The Iron Cross Army does change things up a little more often, if only by comparison. They are led by a Doctor Doom cosplayer by the name of Professor Monster, played by Misao Ando. This wasn't the first time he worked with Toei. He was also the main villain of Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, the villains of that show being called the Black Cross Army, so this is familiar territory for him. Looking back on the series and his wide variety of villain plans, it makes him come across as an eccentric old man, though in practice he largely just comes up with the plans and leaves basically everything else to his second-in-command, Amazoness. She could be one of the most active villain generals I've seen in a tokusatsu series. Everything, and I mean everything, the Iron Cross Army does is carried out by her, ranging from making deals with criminals and corrupt business owners, stealing something the Iron Cross Army wants to make use of, attempting to infiltrate Interpol, making magic mushrooms, causing large-scale death and destruction, the works. There's plenty of child guest stars in this series, and almost all of them are manhandled by Amazoness in some way. In addition, she takes on the civilian identity of Sayako Yoshida, the editor of the newspaper Hitomi works for. She starts off not knowing that Takia is Spider-Man, but continues to have reason to suspect throughout the series. Recognizing that Spider-Man shows up whenever Hitomi is in danger, Amazoness intentionally sends her into the line of fire in hopes of luring Spider-Man into traps. It works until Spider-Man discovers who she is in the 15th episode, where he stumbles upon her in her civilian identity, and she has to abandon it. A shame. I feel like they could have kept this going, as it was one of the more clever aspects of the early episodes. After this point, she starts altering her outfit periodically. I don't know why, she just does. She also picks up a habit of killing people prematurely, specifically people who had information or a MacGuffin she was after, forcing Amazoness to go after their children for what she needs. Kids that were often oblivious to what their parents were up to, meaning Amazoness spends multiple episodes chasing dead ends. You'd think the Monsters of the Week would be given some of the more embarrassing defeats so as not to make Amazoness look so impulsive. Speaking of which, they are called Machine Bems. Perhaps I should clarify, BEM is an acronym for Bug-Eyed Monster, which dates back to the pulpy sci-fi film serials of the 1930s. Star Trek the Animated Series had a character named Bem. He was this guy.
This one wishes you, what is the Earth word? Luck.
Naturally, the Machine Bems are based off an animal of some kind, which just goes to show how much of an impact Kamen Rider left on Toei, as even as early as 1978, this was a tradition for the studio, though the same is also true about Spider-Man's typical rogues gallery.
Hey, wait! So, I'm a rhino, you're a scorpion, and he's an octopus. What's a Mysterio?
A small handful are animal object hybrids, such as Tank Buffalo or Bomb Wolf. Of course, the Machine Bems also include whatever the fuck this is supposed to be, a colorful-looking skeleton dude, a pile of garbage, the Thing, a Triceratops. How many horns does a unicorn have, my dearest viewers? Post it in the comments. Amazoness needs your help. Seriously, you'd be more useful to her than a little over half of the Machine Bems. though there are ones that take a more active role in an episode plot. Several of the monsters in this series only show up for the battle in the climax, without actually taking part in the fight between Spider-Man and the Foot Soldiers, then grows giant immediately, and then the Leopardon sequence starts, which of course has its own set of problems. So overall, some Machine Bems feel like they were included only out of obligation. Fuck it, I'm just gonna say it. Avataro Sentai Dawn Brothers Monsters of the Week have more screen time than most Machine Bems. You gotta feel bad for the people who made these suits. Putting aside the quality of the costumes for a second, they go through all the effort to try to make these costumes and they're on screen for less than 5 minutes. Oh well, at least they all end up on display in the afterlife. That being said, some Machine Bems are more than just Leopardon fodder. Some of them used to be human before being converted into cyborgs, another similarity shared with the original Kamen Rider. I don't know if this applies to all of the Machine Bems, but the ones we do see make it clear that, unlike Shocker, who would turn people into cyborg monsters whether they wanted it or not, the Iron Cross Army operates by being the devil on people's shoulders, promising them power, wealth, the solution to their worldly problems, and it often ends tragically, such as the Snake Woman of Episode 10, a friend of Shinko's who is forced to commit multiple murders on Amazon S's orders, before ultimately choosing to end her own life rather than live as a Machine Bem. I mentioned one that resembles the Thing, and he's another great example. Originally, he was an aspiring wrestler who wanted to live up to the legacy of his crippled older brother, and so he sought out Spider-Man in the hopes of being taught how to be a better fighter. And when that doesn't pan out, Amazon S approaches him with an offer to make him stronger through a special surgery, which ends with him becoming a Machine Bem and running his brother over with a truck. And we can't forget about the guy who willingly became a monster so the Iron Cross Army would pay for his blind daughter's medical bills. The man's a doctor himself, and that's what Professor Monster uses him for, so why he needed to be turned into Ghost Rider I can only guess. Not to say the Machine Bems that aren't former humans fare much better, as Amazon S is abusive to them too, especially Kabuton from Episode 9, who falls in love with Shinko and gets chained up and electrocuted repeatedly for his trouble. They really do take advantage of the downtrodden all the time in this show, such as when they established a rigged casino that leaves people in their debt. Which may or may not sound familiar to some of you because one of Kamen Rider's most popular seasons, Kamen Rider Double, had an episode with a similar premise. Does this sound ring any bells? Money! There's even an episode revealing the Iron Cross Army has, and again I'm not kidding here, agents infiltrating the lives of random citizens so they can ruin their relationships with their family as part of a larger scheme to break the human spirit. Takia may save the family the episode focuses on, but there's nothing to indicate that this ongoing plan was ever stopped on the large scale. This is an evil plan, alright. It's also a goofy plan that's extremely long-term. Professor Monster must have a lot of patience if he's willing to greenlight this plot. It's hard to say what this crazy old man will do, like celebrate the 400th year he spent on Earth by blowing up a dam. Also, this is what happens when he's suffering from massive blood loss. Later, he shakes up the status quo in episode 35, where he steals a pair of mummies from a museum. They look like Egyptian mummies, but apparently they were discovered in the Amazon rainforest. And according to the professor, they are 10 million years old. As in, they predate the evolution of the modern human.
This is starting to sound like a bad comic book plot.
Whatever. He revives them to serve as new henchmen who follow Amazon S around for the last 6 episodes of the show. They don't add much, I'm sorry to say. In fact, they're casually kicked off a roof at one point just to show off the effects of a resurrection potion. Wait a second, Spider-Man is kicking bad guys off rooftops now? That also reminds me of the PS4 Spider-Man game. If the show was looking for new recurring villains, then frankly there was a better option in the character of Dr. Miracle, a shape-shifting associate of Professor Monster wearing what appears to be one of his spare costumes, and sets herself up as a rival to Amazon S.
until Amazoness abandons Miracle during a fight, then Leopardon happens and puts an end to that possibility. As for the Amazon duo of Bella and Rita, they fight Spider-Man in their introduction, but after that they are simply there until the last episode of the show. Except even then, more screen time is given to Amazoness reacting to how Professor Monster is now listening to them instead of her. Sure enough, the finale is where Amazoness not only discovers she was right about Takia being Spider-Man, but she comes closer to defeating him there than she ever had in the series prior, highlighting just how much the Machine Bems were holding her back. While the Amazon duo's final battle with Spider-Man is a minor footnote by comparison. I think these two might be the origin of the useless duo archetype we've seen in several Toei shows in the future. Characters that are supposedly bodyguards to a more important villain, but in practice, they spend their entire screen time standing around looking pretty. Forget Professor Monster, the actresses who play these kinds of characters are the ones who need a lot of patience.
Patience. It can be the key to victory. It can also lead to very little, leaving you to wonder why you waited around for something so disappointing. It's necessary whenever child guest stars and animals are involved, and this show has both.
I was impressed with a pair of episodes that prominently featured a dog, as both times they were extremely well-trained animals. Specifically the latter episode, where a dog leads Spider-Man to an Iron Cross Army base and continues to push forward, the poor beast defiantly ignoring his injuries, which is very convincingly depicted on screen. I have no idea how Toei got this dog to walk like he was injured, but they did. The animals on this show are better actors than the kids. Speaking of which, Gamera may be the friend of all children, but Spider-Man is the one who's constantly saving them from the Iron Cross Army. Starting less than halfway through the series, there's a new kid who takes the spotlight in every episode. One such kid appears in 2 episodes, learning Takia is Spider-Man, getting a blood transfusion from him in his first appearance, and then returning the favor in his second. No, this kid doesn't get spider powers from doing this. Of course, it does lead to him forming a bond with Spidey.
Spiderman はこのまま少年と共に人々の前から姿を消したかった。しかし、それは許されない。少年もまた同じ思いである。
A relationship that is poorly phrased in the extreme. On the flip side, you have one of my favorite episodes of the show, which involves Amazoness trying to locate a psychic girl, while a young orphan recruits Takia in the search for her original parents. What I like about this one is the twist at the end, how Amazoness was a month too late. The psychic girl was already dead, and the orphan girl just happened to look like her. A fight breaks out and Amazoness shoots the girl's foster father, but in the end, both parents live and the girl accepts her adopted parents as family. One of the more heartwarming episode endings for sure. Adopted families deserve more love. Fiction tends to make the step-parents either cruel or cannon fodder far too often. However, this was simply an example of where the kid's family survived. That's not always a guarantee in this series. Takia managing to stop an Iron Cross Army plot, yet failing to save the very people he was trying to help, happens on a regular basis. This show has a reputation for being balls to the wall crazy, but Toei's Spider-Man is more than capable of being serious, with several episodes ending on a bittersweet note.
Before you start making any assumptions, though, this is a bloodless series. Where did the Iron Cross Army get all these guns anyway? They're in Japan!
This leads me to something that I'm not sure if it's a flaw in the writing or an intentional character flaw of Takia's. You see, when an Iron Cross Army plot leaves behind a child with a dead guardian asking Spidey the details about what exactly happened, he clams up and can't bring himself to explain, going so far as to lie to the blind girl I mentioned earlier about her father's death. To say nothing about what happens in episode 21, where Takia makes a really bad decision. An Interpol agent is captured and tortured by Amazoness before Spidey rescues him in an attempt to return him to his son, only for the agent to die before reaching the boy. And it's all because Takia chose the long route of going on foot instead of using the flying car. Seriously. It looks like Takia has yet to learn a lesson all Spider-Men must learn eventually. Say it with me, everybody. With great power must also come great responsibility. Of course, it's something you hear in every Spider-Man continuity, except for this show. What Takia gets instead is a letter left behind by his father telling him,
Remember that as a man, you must always take responsibility for your actions. Because nothing motivates a hero more than saying their masculinity is on the line.
With all that being said, that just leaves the final episode. Although there's not really much I can add since I've already said all I wanted to when I was talking about Amazon S. Except for one thing. Because of the whole situation with the Leopardon costume, the outcome of the final battle with Spider-Man and Professor Monster is,
I am inevitable.
Watching this show is entertaining in its own right, but things quickly turn into a game of, hey, I know that guy, when you notice how many early Super Sentai elements and recurring actors made an appearance in this show. Leopardon may have been a disaster to work with on set, though its popularity is the primary reason why Sentai would become Super Sentai in 1979, introducing mechs into the next series. It appears some of these early mechs have the same height difference problem, but to my knowledge, these early suits were not stolen. I've already brought up how Professor Monster's actor Miso Ando was the Black Cross Führer of Go Ranger, but there's also Shozo Izuka, the voice actor for many of the Machine Bems. He had been the voice actor for 3 of Go Ranger's villain generals, and would continue to do voice work for Toei until 2010. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year. He will be missed, despite how many times he tried to take over the world. Shinji Toto would later appear in Deshi Sentai Denjiman as one of its villains, General Hedora, where the tables have turned, and now he's the one who grows big to fight the heroes and their giant robot. While Amazon S's actress Yuki Kawaga would return for Taiyo Sentai Sun Vulcan, playing the similarly named villain Amazon Killer. Interestingly enough, Sun Vulcan is another show where she ends up with a squad of lady sidekicks that she overshadows in terms of plot relevance. Even Juzo Mamiya's actor Noboru Nakiya was Dr. Hideki Hongo in 1982's Dai Sentai Goggle 5, and has about as much screen time in that show as he did in Spider-Man. This even applies to guest stars. Dr. Miracle, for instance, is played by Michi Love, who was previously Karen Mizuki, one of the heroes of Jaka Dengeki Tai. There's also Jun Tatara, who you probably best remember for being the Wizard Barza in Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger. And then there's an appearance by Hiroshi Miyuchi, who needs no introduction. In Spider-Man, he portrays a guitar-playing detective named Tachibana, who has a young son named Takashi, names that should sound familiar to the audience by now, as well as the concept of a guitar-playing detective on a mission of revenge, for it's similar to another Toku hero Miyuchi played, Keiketsu Zubat. That is pronounced Zubat, not Zubat. You know, the little Pokemon that pesters you every time you go into a dark cave. Miyuchi has much better accuracy. Do I recommend Toei Spider-Man? Certainly. And I'm not the only one. You know who else liked this series? Stan Lee. Nice to know that Spider-Man's co-creator gave this show his approval. I expected Takia to appear in Across the Spider-Verse, though that ended up not happening. Too bad. Just imagine during the chase scene where Miles is swinging away from the other Spider-Men and then suddenly, BAM! Leopardon! Here's hoping they're saving Takia for the 3rd movie. Would they get Shinji Toto to play him again? Presumably with all of his lines spoken in Japanese? Sure, he's 68 years old, but tokusatsu actors have reprised their roles at older ages than that. Whoever plays Takia, I guarantee he'll be a success with audiences, which could easily motivate Toei and Disney to make some sort of deal that will allow this series to get an official international release.
Of course, Toei and Disney are some of the stingiest companies around when it comes to copyright, so that'll be the day. We're just as likely to get an album re-release of the Spider-Man Boogie. Killjoy. Well, we're done talking about Toei Spider-Man, but we're not done with giant robots yet, because my next review is going to be returning to the Bayformers film franchise, a series that isn't quite extinct just yet. I'm looking forward to it.
And I hope you are as well.
Spider-Man!
Spider-Man!
Spider-Man! My son! Can you see through that? That's great. Thank you very much. It's great.
Spider-Man.